Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Helen Crompton is the Executive Director of the Research Institute for Digital Innovation and Learning at Old Dominion University Global, Professor of Instructional Technology, and Director of the Virtual Reality Lab at Old Dominion University. Dr. Crompton earned her PhD in Educational Technology and Mathematics Education from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Recognized for her outstanding contributions, Dr. Crompton has achieved a place on Stanford's esteemed list of the top 2% of scientists in the world. Her exceptional work in technology integration has garnered her numerous accolades, including the SCHEV Award for Outstanding Professor of Virginia. Dr. Crompton's expertise extends beyond academia to practice, as she frequently serves as a consultant for various governments, bilateral and multilateral organizations such as the United Nations and the World Bank, leveraging her knowledge and experience to drive meaningful change in the field of educational technology. Anthony Bloom, or Tony, is the founder and executive director of the Mobiles for Education M-Education Alliance. He has specialized in the field of international development and technology for over 28 years. For 2009 to 2020, he was USAID's Senior Education Technical Specialist, where he provided technical advice to headquarters, missions, and counterpart agencies regarding the appropriate use of technology to support quality educational outcomes in developing countries. While working at USAID, Tony founded the M-Education Alliance to strengthen global collaboration and catalyze knowledge exchange and evidence-informed investments for EdTech use in developing countries. He also founded the All Children Reading, a grand challenge for development, as an open innovation competition and partnership with World Vision and the Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to catalyze tech-based innovations to advance early grade reading. Tony serves on multiple advisory boards, including for Benetech and Rotary International's Basic Education and Literacy Rotary Action Group. He is also the past president of the Rotary Club of Washington Global. And finally, Dr. Sophia D'Angelo is an inclusive education specialist with over 12 years of experience working in both development and humanitarian contexts. As a former teacher and teacher trainer, she is particularly interested in how technology can be used to empower educators in fostering more inclusive and equitable teaching and learning environments. She has worked on various tech-related projects supporting girls, refugees, and learners with disabilities. Some examples of Sophia's recent work include a global systematic literature review on tech-enabled teacher professional development conducted with the EdTech Hub, the development of a digital app to teach adolescent girls about sexual and reproductive health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and an evaluation of a World Bank-funded digital personalized learning project in the Dominican Republic, where she is currently based. Sophia is a 2016 Rotary Global Grant Scholar alumna. She completed her master's degree in international education at the University of Cambridge, where she was then awarded a fully funded PhD in international education. As you can see, we have three really esteemed panelists with us today, and I'm really excited. We could be reading their bios for the entire day, but I'm really excited that they have decided to join us. Next slide, please. This is a three-part series designed to support you as you cultivate effective education technology projects that will create a sustainable impact in schools around the world. These webinars offer tools and strategies to help you plan, find partners for, and implement and evaluate your education technology projects. You can register for the additional webinars at rotary.org/webinars. By the end of the session today, you will be able to, 1, understand how technology is a tool to support learning. 2, learn about current evidence and research on how technology can support learning in schools. And finally, learn ways to integrate technology into primary and secondary education. And now I will go ahead and present our first question to the panelists. The theme of this year's UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report is technology and education. How do you all define technology and education? And Helen, I'll go to you first.
Yes, this is a great question that we often don't consider. What exactly is technology? So technology in education refers to the development and use of tools and resources to facilitate and enhance teaching and learning. So technically, technology is not limited to those modern electronic devices or computer systems. It also encompasses traditional tools and techniques. So we often think electronic devices, however, it can be wooden blocks as a technology to help with counting. But moving into the digital age, we do have a lot of digital technologies, computers, tablets, but we often forget about radio, television. These are part of the digital technologies. If you can plug it in, if it uses electricity or a battery some way, that's a digital technology. And in UNESCO's monitoring report, they actually said they recognize that technology affects education through 5 distinct channels as input, means of delivery, skill, tool for planning, and providing a social and cultural context. So in thinking about that, we do need to look across technologies. And one last comment to add is often people think digital, high-end technologies are better than different things, but the research shows that in many cases that's not actually true, that we've got to actually look and see the best tool. A quick example of that is in China, they have the young children, instead of, using those wooden blocks to build towers and count and things like that, they did it on a 2D screen. And in fact, it actually affected their spatial awareness, that they wasn't as spatially aware, which they got from using those basic technologies. So again, it goes to thinking about the technology, the best technology for what we're using it for.
Thanks, Helen. Sophia.
Yes, thank you, Regina. And thank you to Rotary for this really exciting event, for putting this together and for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here. I think I'm very glad Helen went first, because Helen, that leads very nicely into what I was thinking. I think about technology on a spectrum, right? From low tech to high tech. And as Helen was saying, a lot of the time we're naturally attracted to this high tech, right? We're attracted to this new AI, artificial intelligence, digital personalized learning softwares and games and apps. Virtual reality, for example, virtual reality has been used in education, particularly with teachers. And I find it really, really interesting because, teachers are able to put on these virtual reality glasses and imagine, being in a situation with refugee students or students with disabilities and really experience that firsthand and learn. It brings role modeling or role play. Speaking of AI, that is all AI. But so, there are a lot of different options. But of course, in lower and middle income countries, especially first of all, these are high cost. And in lower and middle income countries where, many communities don't even have access to electricity, let alone the internet, these sorts of options are not always feasible or not always the best. So what we see on the other end of the spectrum and more of the low tech, and especially during COVID-19, for example, the importance of broadcast radio, television to ensure students continue learning from home, right? We see in classrooms the use of music and videos. These are kind of more low tech options that are super important and that make learning more dynamic, more fun for children. Mobile phones especially, I think, are huge. They're becoming more and more common in lower and middle income countries at a low cost, whether they're regular phones or smartphones. Smartphones will allow access to, WhatsApp and Facebook and social media, which are hugely important communication tools. Teachers are using these tools as, to form their own remote communities of practice. Again, during the pandemic, they led these things, right? These weren't government initiatives. These were teachers innovating by themselves, sharing resources, watching other teachers on Instagram to get ideas, etc. And then just my last point I would say is it's interesting because once I started working with children with disability in particular, the World Health Organization defines assistive technology as, going back to what Helen said, very untraditional or concepts of technology, or in other words, no technology is what I call it, including printed materials, communication boards, mobility devices such as wheelchairs, seeing glasses. And I think this is really important because when we talk about technology, we have to also talk about what else is needed to accompany that technology so that students can access it, and so that all students can access it. So this is, whether it's screen readers or closed captioning or these kind of no tech options and tools, I think it's super important. So I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Tony?
Okay, well, I'm not sure I could add to a broader definition than Sophia and Helen, but I will give an example of how typically I respond working in the various agencies that I have. I always describe that technology, I think of from puppetry to satellite. And the puppetry example, when I was working at Peace Corps, there were some volunteers that were doing a puppet show in Lesotho that was so popular that the national broadcaster then broadcast the puppet show. And so I describe it in terms of an ecosystem where a variety of technologies can be used. And I'm just going to give some examples of that from my work on the All Children Reading Grand Challenge, which was this initiative that Regina had mentioned that I was involved with. Across the ecosystem. So if you want to track and trace your textbooks, we ran a prize competition that basically was using low-end mobile phones, basically so that headmasters and parent-teacher associations could verify that they received their books. And so it was really simple, sort of, you put QR codes on the side of boxes of textbooks, and then parents or headmasters use a simple SMS code to verify that they received it. That's an example. Content creation. Well, you could use low-end computers, basically. There's a group called SIL that has something called Bloom software, and they're able to work with students and teachers to produce new books on topics that could be introduced in classrooms. Smartphone game-based apps. We worked on a project with the Norwegian government called EduApp for Syria, which was producing a smartphone-based game called Feed the Monster that basically was able to promote language acquisition. One of my favorite projects that you might not necessarily be intuitive in terms of literacy was called Planet Read in India, and they were using closed captioning of Bollywood videos as their form of sort of literacy support for households. I thought that was a great demonstration of use of technology. And finally, just to pick up on the point that Sophia has made, All Children Reading spent a lot of time focusing on learners with disabilities, and I'll elaborate on that with some additional project examples in response to additional questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for getting the conversation started. Closed captioning on Bollywood films. Wow, I never thought about it as a form of technology, so I appreciate you all broadening our perspectives on what exactly could be technology in education. So I will move to our next question in today's discussion. And it is kind of a loaded question. So can technology solve the main challenges that we face in the education system? And Sophia, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you, Regina. So yes, it's quite a loaded question. And in short, I think we all know the answer is no, and not by itself at least, but it can certainly help. And I think that's really important. I think now more than ever with globalization, mass migration, displacement, conflict, climate change, school closures, we're seeing more and more how technology is super important to bridging some of these inequities, to continue, help students continue learning while schools are shut down, to give access to students who normally don't have access, to offer non-formal or kind of flexible modalities of education. At the same time, it can also perpetuate inequalities, if we're not considering who has access and who does not. But we saw this during the pandemic as well. The poorest students didn't have access to internet, or at least not with the quality they needed to be able to engage in synchronous remote learning, right? Teachers had to go door to door in some cases, use printed materials, etc. So I think this is super, super important to consider. And I also just want to say, the human aspect of teaching. I always describe teaching as both effective, right? We talk about effective teaching, what works, but teaching is also very affective, right? There's a social, relational aspect that technology doesn't always necessarily help foster. I'll just give one quick example from the work here I do in the Dominican Republic. We had a digital personalized learning program where secondary students use an app to learn math, and the app adjusted to their level. It provided them, it allowed them to monitor their progress. They had fun. They used it to study alone. They used it to compete with friends, etc. But when we did our evaluation of the project, we asked, what do you enjoy learning more with? Do you enjoy learning more with the app or with the teacher? And almost unanimously, the students actually said the teacher. And when we kind of try to unpack that a bit, they said, some of the challenges that came up with the app is that they give you one explanation and they give it the same time. They might alter it a little bit, but there's an issue of literacy that we hadn't considered, or that the programmers hadn't considered, because while it can adjust the explanation and adjust the math content to the level of the child, it doesn't necessarily adjust the literacy. And right, the child still has to be able to be literate and be able to read those words, read that explanation, and understand it. And they said, I like the oral explanations that the teacher gives. The teacher is able to explain it orally, they can hear it. And that's why we're seeing technology that will provide written answers, but also audio recordings, and to try and overcome these sorts of challenges. But again, I think it just points to the importance of having teachers. Another key finding from that was that teachers are actually able to use the data from the app to adjust their classes, right? So when we have this combination of human and technology working together, I think that's when the impact is actually maximized.
Great. Thanks, Sophia. Tony?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'd also have to echo that it's not the most important contribution to a challenge or to confront sort of education, but it's really important and it's supplemental. If you look at it as an ecosystem approach, even producing books, Ministry of Education involves technology. So if you broaden sort of where technology is used, capturing data, EMIS, education management information systems that ministries need so that they know where their teachers and schools are, is an important use of technology. Obviously, for data collection, how that data feeds the national decision making, but also flows back to local decision makers, including headmasters at schools. So those are all examples of technology use, even before it gets into the classroom. So I'd say from that point of view, it's a very important contribution to the ecosystem. And not the least of which is for social and behavior change. We think about a lot of social and behavior change campaigns that are in the health sector. What might be greater opportunities to use technology for social and behavior change, both at the national and individual level? So I think there's creative options for technology that are typically not looked at if one's just focusing on technology in the classroom. Having said that, just to pick up on Sophia's point, we're really interested in how you use technology to support learners with disabilities. And of an area intuitively that you would think in terms of use of assistive or augmentative technologies. So I'm on the board of a group called Benetech, and one of the projects that they have is called Bookshare. And it basically is a library, a title of over 1 million titles that they've made accessible ebooks available around the world. And it includes books that for schools, professionals, reading pleasure in around 34 languages. So that would be an example of a really important tool for especially learners that have a low vision or disabilities. That's one end of the spectrum. The other is basically looking at topics like sign language. One of the All Children Reading projects we worked on in Morocco was to take sort of local or national languages and convert it into sign language. or more importantly, sign languages in countries that had never been adapted or shared digitally. That was a really important use of technology. That particular activity actually led the country itself to want to get more engaged in supporting learners with disabilities. And my last example for learners with disabilities, a group called Enable based in Kenya, that they've, among other activities, have produced assistive technology labs that they're training young women that are blind in coding skills and giving them career opportunities. So just wanted to mention those as a few examples of technology use for disability.
Thanks, Tony. And Helen?
Yeah, they're absolutely wonderful examples, as Sophia and Tony have said. And to echo, the main overarching thing of that is technology can't do anything on its own. It's how we use it. There can be some fantastic technologies and not used well. And there can be some basic technologies and used really well. However, I want to kind of come to the elephant in the room with technology, artificial intelligence. So the question, can technology solve the top challenges in the education system? This is an interesting point with artificial intelligence. With the new technologies we have now, the new generative AI, looking at large language models, those technologies, it's not just normal languages. Like we can hopefully in the next few years decode what sperm whales are saying to each other, because it's just picking on small parts to make a larger story. And there was actually a really famous story a while ago about this lady, a young lady, and she suddenly started getting mailings about, congratulations, you're pregnant. And she was thinking, I'm not pregnant. Why am I suddenly getting all this? And a while after, she actually went to the doctor and she was pregnant. And apparently, her internet habits, from her food purchases to what she was browsing, and remember, she didn't know she was pregnant at this time. So what she was doing there, we don't know how it did it, what it was picking up on. But artificial intelligence was saying, okay, to people that do this, have this. So just think about that for education. This is kind of like the holy grail in that thinking we know what we typically look for. And with these AI technologies, it can go beyond that to look at the trends of things we haven't thought about. So that's kind of a big thing I want to kind of put in your mind. The other thing is, again, it goes beyond technology. How many times do we go to places and the technology, they've got a storage room with all this technology from past projects. So it was used and then put away because there was nothing in there to carry it on. And can we show the SETI framework on the slides? The SETI framework came from research, and I can describe that. It's basically circles starting from the center, working out with the educator. There we go. So this one has the educator in the middle about how they use technology. This could be at the center there, perhaps the project that you have. And then going outwards, it has kind of the school system, and nationally. And this pulls in all these different things that need to be considered beyond the technology. Having the technology is just one. We have to think, are people ready to use the technology? Do they have tech support? What are the policies? Are they inhibiting the use of technology? And even outwards to social, cultural tech norms. What are the thoughts behind it? So this framework here came from a study I did in South Africa and the US looking at teacher resilience. And it came from actually a larger framework in 2017. So I'm going to put those citations so you can have a little look further in the chat there if anyone wants to have a look.
Great. Thanks, Helen. I think the SETI framework, thanks to all of you to remind us how tech has to fit into the broader ecosystem of schools. So no, technology on its own cannot solve any problem, but technology within a broader framework, looking at norms, teachers, etc., can maybe help to address some issues in learning. I'll move on to our next question. From from you all's experience, what are the key components of education technology products that improve learning? A lot of Rotary members are out here implementing projects in rural areas and urban areas. What are the key components that they need to think about if they really want to impact student learning and teaching? And Helen, I'll continue with you.
Yes, and obviously going back to that SETI framework, social, ecological, technology integration, that when you go into those places, be considerate that all those pieces are involved. Often the leaders of projects and things, I go through this with them. But the other key component of all of this is digital literacy. So digital literacy, that has kind of multiple parts, from being digitally literate in what you're reading, communication, collaboration, content creation, and safety and problem solving when you're using technologies. So digital literacy is knowing how to use technologies effectively. So we've got the technology, but kind of what do we do with it and how do we keep safe? And in fact, with Tony's group, the Education Alliance partnered with a group, a platform called Allison, and they provided a free digital literacy course. So what we did, I helped develop that, and we built upon the European Commission's digital competence. You might recognize that as DigComp framework. And basically, it's free. And when people go on to the Allison platform to get hold of this, and I'll put the links in, it can help all levels, all ages, and even covers some of the generative AI aspects as well. So as well as keeping, final point, as well as keeping us safe, that it's great being out there using these technologies, but we want to keep safe with ethics and law as well. So I'm going to put the links in and pass to the next person.
Thanks so much, Helen. Tony, I'll pass it to you.
All right, so let me talk about a few other sort of alignments. Okay, one of which is aligned with the national curriculum and teacher professional development. Does your technology project add value? And quite frankly, if you're a teacher, do you have time to be able to integrate that? So you have to make it, in some respects, if it's an in-classroom activity, does it align with the national curriculum? Really importantly, to ask the question, does it improve learning outcomes? So I could tell you with so many projects that I've seen over the years, even if they show that they're statistically significant, it may not make that much of a difference if you've just improved it from, let's say, a literacy project, and it's a few words that you've improved in terms of kids' retention, but it's just not enough for them to learn to read. So you really do have to think about the cost of using your technology contribution, and can you show it in terms of measurable impact, what I would argue, against specific thematic areas. Is it foundational literacy? Is it numeracy? Is it STEM? You could pick the subject, but using some metric and showing that the technology can improve learning outcomes. Having said that, there are great organizations that are aligning their resources with national curriculum, and I'll give you a few examples. Learning Equality is a really well-established NGO that supports, basically, among other activities, taking Khan Academy and making it available in low-resource settings offline. And in fact, looking at the chat, I know there are some folks that are participating today that maybe they could share their contributions of using stuff like a Khan Academy. So they've just worked on a project in Uganda. They have something called specifically a Flying Colors activity that's combining the open education resources of the Khan Academy with project-based learning and including social emotional learning activities in a refugee settlement in Uganda for no internet and low tech. And what they've done is work closely with Ministry of Education to align it. Another example is Harvard's Lab Exchange, which is an open source collection of amazing repositories of science material. And they have over 16,000 resources. And these are just examples of Rotarians being able to be aware of these resources. And then the last item I want to pick up is where Helen's talking about digital literacy for children is, I think an essential component is recognizing the pupils, whether in or out of school, also as a resource for technology projects, not just as clients, but ones that can be actively engaged in helping introduce the technology and the activities to other learners in terms of the peer education process. we're really excited when schools recognize they have this human resource, which are the learners themselves, that could be co-producers and co-teachers of education technology resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Sophia?
Thanks, Virginia. Yeah, I think I'll be quick because I think Helen and Tony have covered most of it. I think there might be a slide to show on our 6-piece framework from the EdTech Hub, in case I can put that up. So this is another framework to think about kind of a holistic approach to educational technology when you think of kind of this whole system, right? So the product, if you look at the pink one right there, of how to select a device, also the people, and we're talking about whether it's securing buy-in from local communities and stakeholders, governments, teachers, of course, we mentioned are key, but I want to extend beyond that even to think about long-term and sustainability of tech and maintaining it and repairing it, right? You need people to be able to take care of the technology once it's there. We did a study in the Gambia on assistive technologies, and there were only 2 people in the whole country who knew how to repair Braille machines. So we thought that is not a very successful option or feasible option in that sense, because there are only 2 people in the whole country to repair these. How are you going to maintain them in the long term? Provision, how you're getting and distributing these technologies to different different parts of the country, especially rural areas. Place, again, making sure that it's contextually sensitive to the place, the national curriculum, the culture, the context, the policy, again, aligned with policy, and pedagogy. And I'll end with pedagogy because for teachers, again, it goes back to Helen and digital literacy, but I would extend this to beyond digital literacy for teachers. I'll give you one example with work that we're doing with Sesame International. So Sesame has these great videos called Watch, Play, Learn videos to teach kids about social emotional learning, science, math, child protection, etc. And they're being used in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, Kenya, Colombia, and in humanitarian settings like Uganda and Ukraine. Now, what we found in our study is that different approaches to technology require additional skills beyond digital skills, right? So there are some teachers using tablets in small groups and some teachers using projectors in whole group settings to show these videos. In the small group settings, classroom management came up as a huge challenge, right? So thinking about equipping teachers with skills in classroom management to feel confident in using this technology in certain classroom dynamics, et cetera, right? It extends beyond the tech skills itself, but ensuring that we have, we're looking very holistically at this. So I'll leave it up there since we're behind.
Great. Thanks everyone. And I know I saw a comment in the chat about frameworks or templates that Rotary members can use. And that's really why I wanted Sophia to show the 6 Ps and Helen showed the SETI. These are templates. So when you're designing your project, what are the 6 Ps? Looking at your product, your people, your provision. So these templates already exist and are evidence-backed, and I love that. And we'll go on to the next question. So Sophia talked a lot about it, and I think Helen and Tony, you keep hearing teachers and teacher professional development. We all know that in education, if we want to make a difference, if we want to make an impact on teaching and learning, in schools, it starts and ends with teachers, not with desks, not with computers, not with tablets. We have to invest our time and our energy and resources into training teachers. So for this next question, I'm curious, what is the role of teachers in technology education projects, and how can we support teachers through what we call a Rotary teacher training or teacher professional development? And Sophia, I'll continue with you.
Thank you. I think we have another framework to present actually to show this a bit. But before I discuss that framework, I just want to say, like, from my experience, teachers have a love-hate relationship with technology. On the one hand, right, they think it's exciting. It can definitely make their jobs easier. We hope, and it should at least, we should design it too. But at the other hand, there's this certain hesitancy, I think, or intimidation almost, especially when they feel like the technology is being used to replace them, or to kind of, and that I think it just shows the importance of really the way we approach technology. It should be, equipping teachers, empowering teachers, recognizing teachers as fully capable agents of change in the classroom, in their schools. They know their students best. They know their needs best. And that's how we need to, we need to engage with them from the beginning. I'm a huge believer in co-creation, co-design, really working with teachers and diverse teachers, not just the same teachers who have voices, because of course there's issues of equity and inclusion at the teacher level as well. And making sure that we're providing a combination of kind of scaffolded support for teachers, but also opportunities for them to innovate and work collaboratively with one another. I'll give one example. So scripted lesson plans are really huge in Kenya and parts of sub-Saharan Africa. They've shown really great gains in literacy skills for young learners. Scripted lessons are, teachers will have it on a tablet perhaps and read through step by step what they need to do, the sort of support they need to give to students, the sort of feedback, etc. Now, semi-scripted lesson plans, which are a little less prescriptive and provide a little bit more room for teachers to innovate and create and make it their own, were actually proven to be a little bit more effective, right? So showing again how it's a combination of scaffolded support, but also allowing them to have agency, empowering them to innovate, to create, to lead, and to make this their own. And that's also a way of building, ownership and ultimately sustainability of these sorts of ed tech projects.
Great. Thanks, Sophia. Tony, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, maybe just to pick up on Sophia, a really good example of scripted lessons with another media you wouldn't think about is interactive radio instruction, where in a number of countries, radio has been used with a scripted lesson and then asking the teacher to pause or whoever the classroom facilitator is. That's a really nice example of scripted lessons that have used mass media. A few other factors to consider, and then I'll just give you a few examples. One of which is just in terms of the diffusion of innovation. A number of years ago when I was working on a World Bank project and we trained a number of teachers over a period of time in various uses of technology, many of them, even before we started the official program in the schools, ended up getting jobs elsewhere because we had trained them with this set of skills. So you do really want to think about, in terms of your project, the diffusion of innovation. If you just have the same group of teachers that are the champions, that might be great, but how do you diffuse that to other teachers in a setting? So that's important to think about in terms of sustainability. Again, I would get to the point of what is the traditional definition of a teacher? And if you're a peer facilitator, as I mentioned in the previous answer, previous question, or education volunteers. And I think about, talk in the last question about the role of Rotarians, but other individuals that are playing teaching roles, especially in out of school instruction. That's another opportunity to reach learners. In terms of a few examples of projects with teachers being trained in the center of it, we ran a competition last year at the Education Alliance called the Global Math Prize. And one of our winners was called 1 Billion, which is working on a project with other groups in Malawi, and basically have disseminated to every primary school sets of tablets. And there's a group of tablets in a classroom, and the kids are working on that independent from when you rotate around, and then the teacher's providing a lesson, and then there's self-paced instruction. So that's a nice combination that not all the pressure is on the teacher in the classroom to integrate technology. And then my last example is a TalkSTEM, the other winner. And this has teachers going outside the classroom, walking with their kids in the community, basically looking at playgrounds and identifying mathematical properties of physical sites that are outside the classroom. So they're taking the classroom instruction outside the classroom, and then using that as an opportunity for a rich dialogue. And it's prompted by having videos basically that are being used to help talk about the mathematical properties of outdoor sites. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Helen, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so echoing again what Sophia and Tony said, and in particular, Sophia, you can tell that you've had experience in the classroom, Sophia. So I had 16 years as a classroom teacher, and I can say it's very difficult. Technology, people come in with technologies and say, oh, here it is, I bought one for you and one for all your students, so everything will be fixed. Everything's great. And it's not. Funny enough, my big issue was time time to kind of deal with all this, time to process these technologies, time to think about how I can use them well. And I want to come back to, again, AI, and I heard Sophia kind of hint on this as well, thinking about educators being replaced. I travel the world on talking about AI, and the question I always get is, are teachers going to be replaced? And I always say, artificial intelligence is all brain and no heart. So in other words, they can mimic doing a lot of things. They can even mimic sympathy, care, consideration, but they are only mimicking. So we need the educator who knows the students, really knows the students, knows the context of where they are, and meeting the students where they are. However, artificial intelligence can really help with that. Again, going back to time, we can offload a lot of things that teachers do often in front of the screens without the students, planning some lessons in the style of what they want, coming up with ideas, strategies, and even just text, explaining text or a glossary of difficult words. AI can do that, which then gets them back in the classroom to spend more time with the students. So that's really helpful. And then those real low resource areas that they're even using adults unqualified to teach, because that's the best thing at that point. Again, artificial intelligence can greatly support those by providing some of that expertise that they can then use. So I'm going to pass back to you now.
Okay. Thanks so much, Helen. And I'll go into our last question, and I'll challenge you all to see if you can answer in a minute or less. How can Rotary members support technology in education? So Rotary members are volunteers. What do you all, with all your expertise, what do you advise? And Tony, I'll turn it to you first.
Yeah, I'm going to just give a few rapid fire examples of Rotary projects that are using technology, just illustrative, and look forward to the Q&A. In one of the recent Rotary magazines, they highlighted Panama's Digital Interactive Classrooms project. One of the members, Nellie of Belrag, was one of the main instigators of this, working with the Rotary Club of Panama North. And they basically began in 2018 with providing laptops for students, whiteboards, interactive whiteboards, and then other hardware and software such as projectors to help introduce a collection of educational materials to learners in some of the secondary schools in Panama. But what they recognized is they needed to reach the teachers. This is like the response to the question before, reach them at the teacher training colleges. So then they've, in the more recent grant, have supported that initiative in 6 teacher training colleges. That's one example of a project. The second of which is I just came back from a State Department funded trip to Samoa, where the Rotary Club of Apia, the only Rotary Club in Samoa, is helping set up the first kids science museum in all of the Pacific. And the museum will include both digital and non-digital displays of botany, birds, other science-related initiatives within Samoa. I think that's a great example of a Rotarian that had a vision and is able to move forward the first science museum in Samoa.
Thanks so much. I'll pass to you, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to cover 2 main points fairly quickly. The first one, which we've not touched on yet, which has a huge overarching impact, is our bias towards technology, whether it's positive or negative. So the SETI framework, if you get to see that again, and don't worry about rolling back the slides, but in the very center was the educator. Think of that, like I said, educator or person organizing the project. Beliefs was right under there. If people believe that technology is going to work, you could have all the resources in the world and it will not work. It's kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy, because you will do actions, whether they're noticing or not, you will do things to make it not work. And again, for positive, you don't want to be too positive that you're putting technology in and technology is not necessary. And with that bias, We've obviously all felt it with, again, artificial intelligence in the last year, because that's had a profound impact on education. And if you've not noticed that, do have a look at some sessions on artificial intelligence, because that is dramatically changing the whole education landscape. And then the second one is kind of to wrap up what I've shared so far, in keeping in mind equity, sustainability, and scalability of those projects. Be sure that you're not putting in technology that's going to go and sit in a room after, but doing something that can build capacity and structure and continues to grow and be successful. So I'm going to pass to Sophia.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll try and keep this quick. I think my main advice to Rotarians would to be not to fall into kind of the myths or misconceptions and assumptions around technology. I think we've spoken about a lot of them today, like, high tech is better, not necessarily. More is better. I think that's also another false assumption. I think what we've all seen, probably computer labs, full of computers collecting dust, not operating and not being used. The assumption of students all being digital natives, I think, is also another one that we also have to, we've talked about digital literacy. I think in Colombia, in a project in Colombia, we had Facebook was commonly used. It's a very important tool. So we incorporated it into an education program and later found that it caused challenges because the parents struggled to access the private groups, right? In the Dominican Republic, likewise, we were using apps and mobile phones and technology that seems simple, but students couldn't access their email accounts, or they didn't have email accounts to set up an account for the app, right? So very little things, and of course, the assumption of what works here is going to work there, or what works there is going to work here, obviously we know is not always the case. To do this, I would, challenge you guys to think a little bit more critically from the beginning about how to design culturally relevant and contextually appropriate, interventions. I think there are lots of ways of doing this. Some are more difficult, but some are kind of low-hanging fruit. On the more difficult side might be engaging, governments or doing co-creation activities, etc. But on the very simple side is a needs assessment or a quick survey to assess needs and to try to identify gaps and what could potentially work. I think lastly, what's important is using evidence, generating evidence, sharing evidence, and kudos to Rotary for doing this webinar series, because I think that's exactly what you guys are doing now, and that's a step in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And Sophia gave a great mention of a needs assessment, what we call in Rotary the community assessment. So please tune in to our next webinar series where we will go in detail about how you can do a really good community assessment for your education technology project. So now I'll move to the question and answer. And so some of these questions were submitted ahead of time, and some of them you all have put into the chat. And so one of the questions I wanted us to start with is about technology in rural areas. And so I think the question is, if there's a place that doesn't have internet, how can Rotary members support projects there? And how can they help if teachers aren't really comfortable or familiar with using technology in rural areas without internet and maybe consistent power supply? I'll add that as well. Sophia, I'll start with you for that question.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a really, really important question. I think, ideally, what I would say is turn to offline solutions, right? There are apps, games, software that can be used offline. You don't need to use the internet. But there are also kind of ways around, context of having low connectivity, right? So, we've seen programs that distribute data packages, and here in Dominican, tarjetas cards with internet. USB sticks are another really great option of putting these kind of, online resources, et cetera, onto a little USB stick or memory stick to then be able to share it. Likewise with even memory sticks for cell phones, et cetera. And then, obviously more complex or a little more costly option would be, in some context, what they're doing is they're actually creating, an internet center within a community or an internet hub where people can go access the internet, download what they need, and then go back to their homes and again, use it offline. So I think there are a lot of different options. It would also, again, have to be context specific. I mean, I think in Colombia, for example, there was a woman who did not want to use data packages because she found that it built kind of a reliance and an expectation on these kind of material objects within the community. So, again, working with local stakeholders to find the best solution.
Thank you, Sophia. Tony, would you want to add what you've seen through your work with USAID and the M Education Alliance? How do you support technology in rural areas?
Yeah. Well, I also want to attract people's attention to Peter Tanner, who's just dropped his contribution is with the Rachel project they're doing, that there's a number of examples about offline repositories that have been used by a variety of Rotarians on a range of devices. What Peter's doing with Rachel and organizations that are using Raspberry Pis, for example, that are really inexpensive. I'd also say there's a greater role for educational video. And I just put that out there. If you're looking to invest in a single technology for a classroom, I might argue that it might be good to get a low-cost projector because you can have all sorts of amazing video content that you could download. Projectors could be powered by solar power. I'd be happy to talk about our work and interest in using low-cost projection. I'm just stop there just to give Helen an opportunity to weigh in as well.
Yeah, Helen?
Yes, and I worked with a lot of refugee camps, especially in Greece, when they had a huge influx of refugees, and they had the same issues. And the big one as well was the electricity. They didn't have any where they were. And Sophia and Tony mentioned a lot of what they use for the content, getting downloadable content, the drives and things like that. But what we had people often do as well, being able to go into towns with the mobile devices. So this comes back to, I can't remember who mentioned earlier, mobile devices are crucial. And what we actually found is, because people would say, well, people don't have mobile devices. But what we found from the research is people displaced might not have a bag of clothes or something else, food, that they will typically have a mobile device because that is kind of crucial. That's a lifeline. So having that and being able to connect, like I said, get the power up from the towns and then go back to where they were. Another solution as well was low-cost solar panels to actually be able to get power to somewhere so they could then go and charge up their mobile devices. So that's just a couple more to add to the list there.
All right, thank you. Another question is, how can we combine research and current evidence from neuroscience on learning and technology in education technology projects? So how are we using the latest research and evidence from neuroscience and other fields to inform the interventions that we use? I don't know if Helen, do you want to start with this question?
Yeah, I could say that. Yes, so that is a critical skill that people need to be able to do, be able to look. And if you look at the academic journals, they're actually very full of esoteric, very language that are difficult to understand. However, this is a call on actually researchers to put other forms out there, from white papers, podcasts, and things like that. And there is a lot out there that you can, there is accessible, that you should go and look to see what there is. Even when you were asking the question, then it reminded me of recent research showing that it's not changing learners' brains, when they're actually on these devices. This is kind of a recent last couple of days thing. But we all should kind of pay attention, because what we often think is the perfect way of doing something, we then find out from research, oh no, we need to do it this way to get the best out of it. So keeping up with the research is important. But again, that call for researchers to make sure that you have accessible forms.
Thank you, Helen. And I'm just going to go to, I know we're getting close on time. I will go to our last question. If there are other questions that you all have, you can send them to me. If you go back to the slide, please, at aof@rotary.org. So you can send those questions if we didn't get to answer them today. So the last question I have for our panelists, from a member, we started working on a project with schools, and the initial thought was that they needed computers. How do we ensure that the technology that we're providing meets the school's needs?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the last question just in terms of the neuroscience research, not to be there's a lot of hype with the role of technology, and including think about the literacy wars that are taking place in the US about the proper way to teach early grade reading. I think you have to look at that also in terms of technology. What's the most appropriate technology not to get swept up in the hype? So I think in terms of decisions, if it really comes down to it's an assessment like Peace Corps had something called participatory approach action framework, which was interviewing the stakeholders, identifying what their needs are, and then making decisions as a community together. I don't know if it's really specific about the type of computer as much as the type of technology. If Rotary Club has limited budget, what are they going to use to spend that resource on? Is it content? Is it hardware? Is it teacher training? I think those are all parts of the assessment.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I will pass it to Tony to close us out.
Okay, well, I want to thank Regina and the other organizers of and Belrag, some of our colleagues, Carolyn Johnson as well, for thinking of this series. It's such an important topic, and there's so much the Rotarians could do in this space that we've alluded to. So really the question is, how will you take action? There's a survey that will be dropped in the chat that you could fill out if you'd like to have more dialogues beyond the series. And Regina will give a quick plug for that. But basically, welcome contributions from Rotarians in all different aspects of the ecosystem. How could you contribute? What information might be useful for you to learn to invest in a technology project? So I think it's an open floor in terms of what might be opportunities at space, and we look forward to receiving your ideas for that.
Yeah, so please, everyone, drop in the chat right now. How will you take action after this webinar? I'm curious. What's something that you're going to take into mind that you've heard from Tony, Dr. Helen, or Dr. Sophia? And I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to read out a couple of them. So these are some of the resources. We will email all of these to you. I know our presenters were dropping so many different things in the chat, and so we will email you out a whole list of all of these resources, including a link to the SETI, the Social Ecological Framework, and the 6Ps framework. I see Jane has written that she's going to think about teacher training in Uganda. Thank you. Next slide, please. And please, if you want to be a part of these conversations, please do join Rotary's Basic Education and Literacy Rotary Action Group, BELRAG. They have a group of folks that's led by Tony who are thinking about how can we do education technology better in Rotary. So I really encourage all of you to join BELRAG if you're not already members. Last slide, please. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Again, we will be on December 7th for our next webinar. Some of the projects that you heard about in the chat, we will have Rotary Nelly from Panama. She'll be talking about the Panama project. We'll have Luzani from Guatemala talking about the Rachel project with Peter. So please do join us for the next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you.